Welcome to the Jocelyn Moore Show. Joining me today is my co-producer, Charmel McMillan of Shawtown Entertainment. Okay.
Hey,
Hi,
Jocelyn.
Charmel. How are you doing? How are you
I'm
doing today?
good.
That's good. Okay, today our guest is Reverend Doctor George DeFord. Okay. Reverend Ford, he's here to talk about his latest release, Miraculous Pastor and Wife Account of Illness and Recovery from COVID-19, co-authored by George F. and Lila 84, which is his wife. Okay. Reverend Ford is a native of Baltimore, Maryland, a graduate of Morgan State College, now it's Morgan State University, a proud member of the Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated. He is happily married to Lila, which he fondly referred to as his girlfriend and wife, who is one of the same. How you doing today, Reverend
I'm
Floyd?
I'm doing well. Thanks be to God.
Thank you. Glad you be with us today. Okay, let's start this off. Reverend Ford, how'd you come about with the title of your book?
Well, let me first confess that I didn't come up with this title. The original title was that I had developed was "Healed in the Midst of the Coronavirus Pandemic: A Couple Suffering and Recovery from COVID-19."
Mhm.
And so, as Miss Lila, as I refer to her at times, and also my girlfriend and wife is one and the same, we had a rather, I'll say, deep discussion about the title.
Right?
And so, and it was her feeling that the title I had was a little bit too, I guess you say, as if I were writing a dissertation of something.
Okay.
And so she, through her prayer and so forth, came up with the idea. She said, since you're talking about miracles and you were referred to as a miracle, why don't we use miraculous? Well, to be honest, I didn't feel it. Nevertheless, I yielded, and hence the title Miraculous is how the title came about.
It's a
So,
wonderful title.
yeah, so as we have it, that's the title that was initiated by my girlfriend and wife, who's one and the same, Miraculous.
Very good. Very good. Were you called in the ministry early or later in life? And how do you know that you were called by God?
Well, that's an interesting question because you use the construct called, and it can go off into biblical and theological uh, understandings. But I think it was more or less from the socialization where I grew up, in a sense of being in the church. And of course, my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, at the time was an evangelist, and that was during a time when women were not allowed in the pulpit. And as a youngster, and of course, I come from a Baptist background plus a Methodist background, so I refer to myself as a Metho Baptist. Uh, but being in her presence and having an interest in what she was doing, I can remember, and this is perhaps before you ladies' times, they had these little old black pleather three-ring notebook binders. And my grandmother used to write with a lead pencil, as she called it. And she had all of these manuscripts, that she had written, and I wish I had them now. But she would this book was about that thick, and I would read through it, and of course the entire book was in cursive, in pencil. And then there were other books that she had, Desire of the Ages, and I still have some of those books here. Um, I won't get up and get them because they're right over on my bookshelf. And
Okay.
I would always go through that book, and I remembered Satan, the picture of Satan being, thrown out of heaven, and
Mhm.
so many other biblical pictures. And of course, the emphasis at that time, you didn't see the pictures of people of color.
Mhm.
And so, it was more or less from a Eurocentric perspective. But, and then with that kind of socialization, and then being in church, hanging out with the gang, as those the guys that we grew up with in the scout unit, and scout master. And so of course we participated, once a year in youth day and so forth. And I played a role in, being the chair of it. But one thing I think I said in one of my earlier books, that on Sundays when the boys and the guys and the young people were up in the gallery, and you'd have communion Sunday, and it was something about that gospel choir that just moved me. And there was a lady, and I know she's gone, I can't remember her name now. But even though you had the number one choir and the number two choir, the youth choir, and the gospel choir was always on the floor level of the sanctuary. But when they sang, something just went through me. It was a tingling, as best I can recall. But I would never tell the guys the way I felt. I would never confess that. And so then one day, I guess I was about maybe about 12 or 13. I was in middle school at the time. Well, they call it junior high school. And so I was working on what was called in the Scouts the God and Country Award. And so as I was talking with Pastor, I told him, I said, I think I want to be a minister. And that was just the language at that time.
Mhm.
Why did I say that? And the word got out that I wanted to be a minister. So I was intimidated. So I learned to keep my mouth shut.
Mhm.
And then in my senior year, when I was in high school, a German teacher, no, art teacher asked me, he said, well, what are you going to do? And I wanted to be all sophisticated and intelligent. I said, I want to be a theologian.
Mhm.
Didn't know what the word meant. It sounded good.
Mhm.
I say all that to say this, that these were my underpinning experiences that moved me in the direction that God had called me. I didn't hear any lightning flashes and falling down and rolling over and making all kind of promises, but it was a progressive experience of recognizing what God had called me to do. And like some young people, I went to my far country, but I had enough of Christian education and training in my knapsack of life that at the time I came back to my father's house. And I think at that point I was ready.
Mhm.
And it began to move on me. Becoming an adult Sunday school teacher, and working with the youth as an advisor,
Mhm.
and then sensing a call that I needed to, study, to be in study. And then remembering when my grandmother would go to this, it was an extension school of the Virginia Union University. And so after my encounter, and confession, of the Lord as my Savior, that I went to the Virginia Union School in Baltimore. And then from there, I uh, submitted to go to Howard, and I was admitted into the School of Religion, as it was called at that time. And and so I would say that in terms of being called, it was a progressive experience
Mhm.
of the socialization and other personal experiences and encounter and challenges of life to come to a point of recognizing God wants you to do this. And then sometimes, believe it or not, there are other people who may see things in an individual that the individual doesn't see at the time. And I was part of the Naval Reserve, and I was aboard. We had a ship that would go out, once a month and do training. And this uh, first class, sailor from West Virginia, he had a little bit of bluegrass twang to him. He said, "D, you look like a Baptist minister." And I'm saying that because there are things that come in your way. There's a signage, if you will, on your journey of faith that brings you to a point where you recognize that God is calling you for a certain purpose in the kingdom of God.
So God sends messages
Messages.
along, signs, and people sometimes see your purpose long before you do.
Exactly.
Let,
Exactly.
let me ask you this, Reverend DeFord. When you were writing your book, and I believe it's about the miracles recently that you have encountered and endured, could you give us a synopsis or a little bit about what the book is without giving it away? Because we want people to buy it. But what led you to write the book? What is the book about?
Well, the book is about our experiences of being infected with the coronavirus. And I use some biblical terms in describing it as a Jobian experience. And those who are familiar with the scripture know about, the challenges of Job, the
Mhm.
calamities. And I think that first chapter dramatized for me the 21st century experience of having that kind of experience in with this coronavirus. What am I saying? Um, my mother-in-law, who lived with us for 5 years, and uh, uh, also who was a Morgan. Well, she went to Morgan for a semester, and she went to school when it was just up on that hill, that one building.
Yes.
Mhm.
I'm a
Uh,
Morgan alum too, so I know
yeah,
what you're talking about.
and now a very bright woman. Not to go off on a tangent, but
Go on.
once she was we had to take her to the hospital, and the doctor was amazed at her cognitive ability and the way she expressed herself or what was going on. And then she could really I guess the word I'm groping for is make you feel like you're the only person in the room and the best
Mm.
person in the world. She had just that. She was just that personable. But anyway, there was a series of things that happened, and having fallen out of the bed, having to be transported to the hospital, come back home, and in the rehab, and you know nurses coming to attend to her, and finally she got sick in April, and she went to Savista or Charles Regional Hospital. And then we discovered that we were positive for COVID. And um, while I was in one room, Lila was in the other. She went home, and I had to stay. And not knowing at the time, and I just learned this after I was released from the hospital from rehab, that mother was in quarantine the same time I was. She was in the room next door to me
Wow.
when she transitioned. It was about 5 p.m. on a Friday, the April 10th. Although I did not know it at the moment, but you were continuously hearing code blues, and then after that, I was in ICU. And the best thing that I can tell you is that I just had me a big sleep
Mhm.
until I woke up, and about a month later.
Oh my
Mm,
goodness. Wow.
wow.
Yeah, and then Lila, she's a journalist. Well, she journals and
Uh-huh.
keeps a record daily, and so you'll read her account of each day
Mhm.
of the experience. And it was then that I was sort of brought up to speed that mother had transitioned,
Mhm.
and I sensed that it may have been, but I did not know. It was only confirmed when I had come home
Mhm.
from rehabilitation. But initially, um, 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 forgive me for a moment because sometimes they just say that I go into a fog,
Mhm.
but that's just a side effect of this stuff. But um, what was I supposed to say? My girlfriend is sitting right here. She's very
Okay.
shy.
My dad
Hello.
calls
Hi.
my mom his girlfriend too. They've been together, they've been married 55 years.
Oh, really? Ooh,
Yeah.
55
Well,
years.
we're pushing 43.
Oh,
Okay.
wow. That's
And
great.
but anyway, what was I saying, Lila?
You just said,
Yeah.
or once you came out of the,
Yeah. When I
you read some of my notes
Yeah, I
there.
read some of my notes, and to read her journal was, I guess, frightening. Um, some of the things that had happened to me, and just how close I was to the door.
Right.
And then the one of the nurses there told me that statistically, uh, there's only 20% who makes it out of there with my preconditions and my age and all.
Mhm.
And I didn't even know all of this was going on and some of the problems they had
Mhm.
with me. Um, I um, I lost about 50 pounds,
Wow.
Wow.
and although I've gained it back now,
Good
but
food.
but yeah, I can't tell you what happened from the point the doctor, said to me that they were gonna, did I want to be resuscitated, and I said, huh?
Hmm.
And it was at that time I uttered a quick prayer and I said, yeah. And the nurse told me, well, we're going to take good care of you. And I just assumed that that's what was going to happen. But I didn't know that I was in the danger zones and so closely to exiting, this life. Uh,
I was reading. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Reverend Floyd.
Go right ahead.
Okay. No, I was reading the book, and your wife, I was reading her journal, and each time I turn a page, it's like, oh my goodness, all this is going on. You had no idea. And she went through a lot then. I read her sister had COVID, mother passing, and while you were sleeping, and she couldn't even go to her mother's funeral because she was quarantined.
Mm-hmm.
Your wife was quarantined.
Mm-hmm.
It was just amazing.
I had a
God is good.
question.
Hmm.
Without giving away your book, Dr.
Oh,
DeFord, I wanted to know when you were in ICU, did you have any outer body experiences where it feels like you are crossing over? You know what I mean? Because I've had a lot of people, I have a different platform, but I have a lot of people who talk about this out of body experience where they feel like they see a light, they feel like they've seen loved ones, they feel like,
oh,
they're at the brink of passing away.
No, I did not get to that point as best I can remember.
Okay.
The only one thing that I remember is when I thought while I was in ICU, I saw the nurses pushing on a gurney, and when people decease, they put them in, on a gurney, and it's
right.
almost shaped like a coat bag.
Hmm. Right.
And I thought I saw that, but then mixed in with that, I thought I was in Baltimore at Von Green's funeral home.
Oh,
And the reason I thought that, and then I had this, I still remember this conversation. Well, uh, we can help pay for the service. Now,
Mhm.
whether that was delirium or dreaming, I don't know. But I do remember seeing these folk walking around in astronaut like outfits, the PPEs,
Mhm.
and pushing this gurney. And the only other thing seemingly I remember is that I was outside the room looking at them pushing it down the hall.
mhm.
Mhm.
Now, if that was out of body at that point, then I guess that's what it was. But that left an indelible impression on me.
Mhm.
And um, and then after that, I know I could not speak or say anything or even move. And so then I recall the nurse coming to me, several of them coming to me, and rubbing me on my shoulder. And through the as much as I could discern, it's like they were, I guess, for lack of a better word, happy,
Mhm.
and rubbing me on this on my left shoulder. And then the next thing I know that I I was in 3 South, and it was hard for me to speak. I couldn't speak.
Mhm.
And then another nurse came in, and that's when I heard the word "You're a miracle."
Wow.
And it was at that point, and um, the experience was surreal.
Mhm.
Um, I was concerned. I dreamed about, and I guess this was a dream about one of my nephews who he graduated from Morgan, but I recall this dream of his uh, being in a Marine officer's uniform.
Mhm.
And I was saying to him, "You can do it." And all of this was perhaps in the state of delirium that I was in from the medications and so forth.
Mhm.
But then as I became more alert,
Mhm.
I wanted to see Lila.
Oh, cool.
That's being away. That's all. That's all I wanted to do.
Was it a month? You were out a month, right? The hospital about a month?
Yeah,
Mhm.
I went
Wow.
in on April the 8th, and I was discharged May the 8th.
What's your question? What do you say to people who are not believers? You are a miracle. What do you say to those non-believers? What can you tell us all?
I feel sorry for those who deny that it is real.
Mhm.
I feel sorrow and, well, maybe I'm feel a sense of compassion for those who refuse to accept the truth that it exists.
Right.
And surely, if Jesus can heal persons who were afflicted with various illnesses, be it paralysis or be it demon possessions, or even being dead and brought back to life. Uh, this experience was real. It's real, and I thank God for giving uh, the physicians and the medical teams and the
Mhm.
nurses the wisdom and understanding to treat, because all of this becomes part of God's grace and mercy. in treating, and ministering to people. Now, um, previous administration, I recall, said it was a hoax until
Right.
such time
Mhm.
that the leader became infected
Right.
Right.
and then tried to play it off.
Right. So,
And
oh, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask, because I didn't want Jocelyn to forget. You mentioned you have other books, correct?
All right.
And so I wanted to, one, make sure before Jocelyn closes out the show that we mention your other books and also mention where they can get your new book.
Okay. Okay. There are two other books that I've written, and well, of course, you've seen this one.
Right.
Miraculous. Okay.
They're miraculous. The first one I wrote was um, I think it's
Okay.
Let me see it. Good.
Yes. Uh-huh.
yeah. Experiences in serving African American churches in context, urban,
Mm-hmm.
suburban, and rural. And the purpose of this book was more or less to be an advice book to seminarians. I know they fill you up with a lot of theological stuff and
Right.
church history, and how to work on sermons, do the homiletics, but they done and they give you just perhaps one semester of church administration. And so many of the seminaries, when they go out, they want to get this big church, this big building,
Mhm.
and have all these choirs and all that sort of stuff. It ain't like that.
Right.
The
Right.
average church is a medium-sized church, and then you, of course, you have your rural churches that are situated, and some of the things that happen. One of the things that happen is that the seminarian is, if he or she is not a second career type and coming from a church setting,
Mhm.
just fresh out of undergrad and going into seminary, they have a rude awakening. And so what happens is, I try to give them some uh, ideas or some plant some seeds of what to expect in different contexts.
The
Mhm.
real deal.
Yeah, the
Right.
real deal, so to speak. That in the urban church is going to be, some of the things are going to be totally different than in the rural church. And
Mhm.
sometimes what happens is some of these, young pastors will carry the notion that they're going to take the big church that they came from and try to put it in the
Mm-hmm.
the, the rural
Right.
setting, and then they run into conflict.
Right.
So I try to say, prepare yourself,
Right.
for the family setting, and then
Mhm.
listen with a second ear, because uh, folk are going to use nicknames, and
Mm-hmm.
you got to listen what Crow said to Booby, and
Mm-hmm.
and and then you got to learn about the PLC, the Parking Lot Committee.
Right.
Mhm.
So these are some of the things I lift up, and I touch upon, the suburban church being like a hybrid of both rural and
Mhm.
urban, and then of course the major. The next book is
Oh,
um,
yeah. Okay.
celebrating the African American celebration uh, life within the African American tradition, and
Okay.
this was um, dealing with basically funeral services within, was sort of like an extension from the experiences of church, churches doing funeral service in urban, suburban, and rural churches. And one of the uh, uh, churches that I used as an example was Jocelyn's home church, Asbury, in which one of the things that was interesting, and I thought this very unique, was that they had the praying and prayer bands.
Right.
And this is an Africanism that is part of the legacy from Mother Africa. Also, I talk in brief about these code songs that the slaves sung. Even though they sing with passion, there's a great camp meeting, but these were codes.
Mhm.
And then, talking about hush harbors. And sometimes we romanticize, the gathering in the wilderness. Would you say when you come out the wilderness? In other words, they were talking about when they came out from the church meeting that was in the wilderness.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. In other words, and then having to do it secretly,
Mhm.
and how some of the things that were improvised, such as that big kettle,
Mhm.
that when folk got happy, they had to stick their head inside the kettle and put the wet blanket over so the sound would be muffled and they could shout inside the
Oh, okay.
kettle.
Mhm.
Wow.
Didn't
Where
know
can
that.
they pick up your books? Because I want to put it on the screen before Jocelyn closes out.
Right.
This book, um,
Is it
uh,
Amazon?
yeah, no, you could probably get it on Amazon, but also from the Anointed Press in Cheltenham.
Oh,
Okay. But they can order
okay.
all your books on Amazon? Are all your
Yeah,
books on Amazon?
this book may be kind of hard to get because it was Zulon Press, and they've been pressing me uh, to let them publish more. And
Oh,
Mhm.
they
really?
So the newest book, though, the newest book, where is that available?
Miraculous.
Amazon,
Amazon?
Miraculous
Okay, then make
Amazon.
sure I put that.
and Cheltenham. Um,
Okay.
Okay.
I was working before I did this one. I was working on I had done some preliminary work on the grief of pastors, and that happened, Jocelyn, right after my son passed,
Right.
and that was a personal experience. And then I discovered that many pastors don't go for um, 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 um,
Grief counseling.
grief counseling,
True.
and surprisingly, both men and women pastors. I use the expression they stuff it in their robe and keep on going like they got it all together, but inside they're crumbling.
Mhm.
And so that's what that's one of the things I want to work on again. Before
Your next project.
yeah, that's my next project. I think.
Well,
Well,
Reverend Ford, I'm sorry. Time is going, and we appreciate you coming today. You
Hmm.
write another book, please let us know. I'll have you back on the show. So you had 3 books out, 3 books. And I think you wrote the 3
No,
books all during your retirement, right?
I
During your
say two and
retirement.
a half books.
2.5. Okay, all
Yep,
during your
after my
retirement.
last live.
After your retirement.
Yeah,
Okay. Well, thank you again, Reverend Ford. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you weren't a believer, maybe you're a believer now. Miracles do happen.
yeah.
There. And Reverend Ford is living proof, right? Living proof. Okay.
That's
Thank you so much for joining us. And Sharmel, again, thank you so much.
welcome.
Okay.
You're
Okay, everyone.
welcome.
Okay, everyone, you have a blessed weekend. Okay, and God bless. Until next week.
that's you.
Uh,
Okay.
thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.